fellow Phoenix members, friends, and guests. I am Good afternoon, fellow Phoenix members, friends, and guests. I am Rina Manuel, your MC for today. And on behalf of the Phoenix Tax and Legal Committee, I would like to welcome you all today to our webinar entitled Create, Update, and Discussion. As we start our webinar, let us all bow our heads and join me in prayer. Merciful God, we ask that you give our leaders the wisdom to guide our nation and the world out of the current economic crisis. Help us to protect the poor and all those who are struggling during this difficult time. Provide for their needs and give them hope. Open new opportunities for them and furnish the resources they need to live with dignity. Encourage those who have enough to share essential resources with those who lack the necessities of life, and to do so with humble, grateful, and loving hearts. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am Rina Manuel, and I am your MC for today's event. As we all know, Republic Act 11534, or the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or CREATE Act, was finally signed into law by President Duterte last Friday, March 26, 2021. While most part of the law was kept intact, there were particular provisions which were vetoed by the President. Today, we are glad that we have with us this afternoon no less than the principal author of the law and key representatives from the DOF and BIR to discuss, among others, the implications of these vetoed items plus implementation concerns. Knowing the importance of this discussion, the Phoenix to the public so that we may all be updated on this very important piece of legislation. I know that we are all excited for this afternoon's discussion, and to start our program, I would like to call on a distinguished and well-respected tax luminary, to formally open the program with her welcome remarks. She is the co-chair of the Capital Market Development Council, a past president of the Tax Management Association of the Philippines, a past president of Phoenix, and the chairperson of the Phoenix Tax and Legal Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all warmly welcome Attorney Benedicta Dikdu Baladan.
Thank you very much, Rina. I hope I am coming in clear. Well, they said I should have the opening remarks. So what all I can say so that we can save on time is I welcome you to this very important webinar, which is Create, that we have long been working for. And so may I go ahead and introduce our speakers. There's a full list of distinguished speakers that we have lined up for you today. And for our first speaker is a legislator par excellence who has taken upon himself the moral duty to protect the revenues of this country. A sui generis, a class of its own, who told me to read the Bible before writing a law. And then he said, after that, you read the Constitution thereafter. An indication that he puts God above all else. And if I may read to you his favorite section of the Constitution, it's Article 6, Section 28, Paragraph 1, that he had memorized. And that says that the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable, and the Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. Ladies and gentlemen, the person I am talking about is Representative Joey Salceda, a congressman of the 2nd Congressional District of the province of Albay. He is currently the chairperson of the House Committee of Ways and Means and the vice chairperson of the House Committee on Appropriations and Committee on Economic Affairs of this 18th Congress. He is also the co-chairperson of the Economic Stimulus Response Package cluster of the Defeat COVID-19 Special Committee. Previously, he also served as an economic advisor to various Philippine presidents and was the presidential chief of staff of Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. He also worked as the chief of staff of then Congressman Raul Roco and a congressional fellow of Speaker Ramon Mitra. He has shepherded and championed Create from beginning to the end, being a comrade in going around far places in the country to generate buy-in, and he is a critical figure in the last stages at the Bicameral Conference Committee. Our first speaker today, whose task has not ended yet, as there are 2 more packages left to work on, is my idol, the eminent Joey Salceda. Our next speaker, I will have to introduce them all at the time so that successively, so that we won't waste any time today. Our second speaker is herself an established institution at the DOF, having started her career after graduation at the DOF and rose to the rank of assistant secretary. I met her in the early years of our career when we were still serving as lieutenants of our bosses, she at the DOF while I was with the BIR, and our role then was to slip small pieces of papers with cues on technical questions thrown to our bosses. Fast forward, Tere is now a high-ranking officer, and her work covers fiscal policy and planning initiatives with focus on the tax reform program, revenue forecasting, and fiscal programming. She also briefs credit rating agencies and international fund managers and investment bankers on current developments in the fiscal sector and the tax reform package. Tere, as we fondly call her, is from the UP School of Economics with a master's degree on development studies from the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, the Netherlands. And during the question and answer portion, we will be joined by 2 high-ranking officers of the BIR, as we have expected that there would be a lot of implementation issues that will be asked. So today, during the Q&A, we will be joined by Attorney Laro M. Barcelo, who is the Assistant Commissioner of the Legal Service in the BIR. Previous to that, he worked with the Legal Affairs Office of the President in Malacanang. And he also was Vice President, Trade and Investment Development Corporation, and the Chief of Staff for Legal of the Office of the BIR Commissioner. And then he will be joined by Attorney Elenita Berry Kimosing, Assistant Commissioner for Project Management and Implementation Service at the Office of the CIR. Lenny actually is a former colleague at the BIR 20 years ago. She is a CPA lawyer who has been with BIR for 43 years now. She also rose from the rank and taking various posts as Revenue District Officer, Chief of Collection Enforcement Division, and a technical assistant of the Deputy Commissioner for Operations, among others. Among her significant projects and assignments are the digital transformation of the BIR and, of course, the tax reform. So we will be joined by all these eminent guests today. May I now call on my favorite, Congressman Joey Sarte Salceda.
Let's go straight to the next page. First, I would like to thank Phoenix for this opportunity to explain the reform that Congress, together with the executive, have jointly pushed in order to improve the competitiveness, as well as, since it was being crafted during the pandemic, somehow at least it became part of the stimulus package of the government. Okay, next. Ang bagal, Sally. So just try to explain the core principles of the reform. Next. Well, these are the principles of our committee. Whenever I consider any legislation, the first thing I think of is who will pay for it and who will benefit. So letter A would mean FIES. Second is we do DSGE, which is the aggregate impact as to employment, inflation, as well as GDP growth, or GVA, which is actually the king for me. After knowing that it will not unduly affect the poor, the real thing, the real driver of the committee is gross value added. Then letter C, of course, is CBA. So as tax incentives are public investments, they should be justified by CBA, that the state stands to gain more eventual revenues and the state gains more from the impacts. Next. So this is actually next. And then, of course, we look at what other countries are doing. That's why we introduced the digital tax, which, of course, Dick Baladad was most gracious and generous in sharing immediately. But because of her um, our resource person, we were cut down to only the digital VAT rather than the other things that I would have wanted. Then, of course, the precautionary principle. We always try to anticipate if things go wrong, if suddenly there are major exogenous or even internal changes. So every tax policy has to have safeguards against abusive behavior. And I think one of the one syndrome of that I am always wary of is how this tax would be used in a political economy like the Philippines, which still dominated by rent-seeking behavior. Pardon, but I still not cannot change my mind there. I think rent-seeking remains to be a dominant feature of our economy. And then, of course, lastly, that it should always follow pari passu. That's in the Constitution. The committee tries to apply the same treatment to similarly situated enterprises or product market fit. Next. So having explained that, let's go to the core principles of the reform. Essentially, we wanted to lower corporate income tax to 30, but we to make it regionally competitive from 30 to 20. But of course, our original was changed at the Senate side. So as a compromise, we just went down to 25 instead of 1% per year for 10 years. That's part also of the stimulus. Then we codified incentives into a single menu that is indifferent to whether you are inside or outside an eco zone. So, and the second one, and I think this is where a bias, which is also in the Constitution, towards countryside development as well as, of course, gross value added. Then we rationalize incentive management through and strengthen FIRB and return IPAs to primarily as investment promotion, not regulatory agencies. Next. So actually, if you take the net present value using a discount rate of 7% of 8%, 8% na yan, actually the NPV of the CIT cat alone would already be around 7.1 trillion or 67% of our currently depressed market. So next. So fiscal, actually my own engagement here is that as early as 1998, I filed using the Australian model, the Subsidy Council Act, one of which, if you read it, there is a Subsidy Oversight Council, which is almost like the FIR, to send signal to economic players that incentives are a scarce resource and therefore should be managed like government expenditures. Next. And in my second term, I also introduced the Omnibus Investment Incentive Code, which was performance-based, where incentives were essentially performance-based. Double deduction R&D, double deduction in training and reinvestment. So actually all these were combined, were what you can call the seeds for this reform. Next. So next. I had, they say 200 plus briefings. I don't know the exact number. I think it would be 220 or to whatever. Press engagements and interviews to explain CITIRA or create. Next. So let's first start with the taxation of corporations. Next. So this is the comparison of the SIT in Asia as of 2021. The green one is really for SMSE. So we're still not the lowest, but at least we're now more comparable with Myanmar. But we're not that far as the 30%. But obviously, I think in the next administration, I think the 25 will go down to 20. That's my expectation. We just have to go with the tide. And I think for the Philippines, it will always be Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia and Malaysia. So those are the four countries that essentially I look at. So we would be 20, some, I think eventually. Next. So the largest fiscal reduction measures in the Philippine history: domestic SMEs from 30 to 20, domestic corporation below 5 from 30 to 25, foreign corporation 13 and 5, and the minimum corporate income tax from 2 to 1%, but only applicable between July 1 to June 30 to 30, 2023. I think, I don't know what, I don't know, but there are team up members here, so they would know what the minimum corporate income tax is. Just government borrowing from you until you make money. Next. And then the non-profit from 10 to 1%, foreign source dividend received by domestic corporation, 15% exempt, actually under create, it is now exempted, subject to proof of reinvestment of earnings in the Philippines, and the improperly accumulated earnings, also known as retained earnings. So before there was a 10%, now it's repealed. So zero. Next. As I've said, this was created because it took the Senate so many years, because we passed it in October 2019, 2018. It took them until 2020 to consider it. So we used the measure essentially as an instrument of social policy. So there is a temporary reduction of the MSIT from 2 to 1%, and the reduction of percentage tax from 3 to 1% effective July 1, 2020 until June 30, 2023. So that's about 3.5 years. No, 3 years. Next. There's also temporary reduction of corporate income tax from non-profit schools from 10 to 1%, effective July 1, 2020 to June 33, 2023. And the regional headquarters, the so-called ROHK, 10%, 10% special income tax rate until December 31. But they will be regular seat effective July 1, 2022. There are only two of them anyway, right? Christian? ROXU ilan? I don't know how many they are. But they are not that many. Tama ba? Two? Yeah. Next. Then the VAT on sale and importation of capital equipment from 12% to exempt starting July 1 to 23. VAT on sale and importation of all prescription drugs from 12 to 0. Pero 2023 basically is that so the thinking there is almost like 3-year reprieve. So VAT on sale of importation of vaccines for COVID from 12 to exempt. Next. On the VAT provisions, tapos na yun na. Next. So VAT on e-books, exempt forever. VAT on drugs on cancer, mental illness, tuberculosis, and kidney from 12 to exempt forever. Next. And VAT exemption, importation, and VAT zero rating on local purchases of, andyan pa rin, on crude oil. Nagkaroon ng konting ano dito kasi I wrote actually a memo for the president explaining why we took this position. Kasi yung pagpasok dito ng crude oil, nagkakaroon, napakalaki po talaga ng impact pagdating po sa stranded refunds. So it's taking the BIR more than 2 years. So ang inano namin, we compared it to Singapore, to several other countries. Actually, they don't tax crude upon importation. They tax it upon removals. So we just made it ano. Next. So let's go now to the second part of the create. So pre-create, I create a different regime. So most of them have forever, except for BIR, for BOI, which has 6 years, basically ITH. So cumulatively, the ITH would be 6 to 8 years and GIE 5% forever. Next. So, bakit dito kaganto? Actually, this is one of the major introduction I made to the original Sitira, which is in the original Sitira, which is really to favor all the other areas, the green ones, and secondarily through the emerging metropolitan or areas contiguous, and the NCR is the one that's red because of the propensity to invest in NCR because of the ecosystem and because from a political economy, you're spending 700 billion for a subway to serve 13 million people. So you can just imagine the need in this country to distribute public investments, and therefore, since incentives are essentially public resources. Next, para nabalik-baliktad. So these are the incentives for export enterprises. ITH, of, depending on your tier, in-explain ba natin yung tier dito? Tier 1 is basically basic. Tier 2, intermediate. Tier 3 is essentially advanced. Tier 1 would look like essentially what example? Doon kasi sa dati meron ano eh. And then they have a choice. They get 4 years ITH if you're in the capital region. But if you're in Metro Davao and Metro Cebu and contiguous like Bulacan, Pampang, Bulacan, Rizal, Cavite, and Laguna, you get 5. All other areas 6. But if you invest on tier 2, that is the intermediate, like intermediate manufacturing, like let's say crude refining, which was defined in hindi mabito, 5 years and then 10 years ED. So they have a choice of whether using enhanced deduction or SEIT right from the start, and 6 years and 10 years ED, 7 years ITH. For tier 3, which is like robotics, artificial intelligence, all the other fourth industrial revolution enterprises, you get 6 years plus 10, 7 plus 10, and then 7 plus 10. So if you relocate from NCR to all the other areas, you immediately get 3. Like from NCR, you go to Bulacan, you immediately get 3 upon commercial operations. But you have to close down. You have to proof of closure. Now, if it's recovering from an armed conflict or a major disaster like Alba, you get another 2. So enterprise may choose between SCIT or ED. This is for export. Now, the incentives for domestic market enterprises, next, is still like that. except 456, but shorter ED or enhanced deduction of 5 years across the board, and then it's the ITH that essentially still, if you relocate from NCR to, let's say, Quezon, you get 3 years more, and if it's no if it's recovering from disaster, then you get 2 years more. Next. So tier one includes activities that high potential for job creation, take place in sectors with market failure, generate value creation. Initially, we had a list, but it was vetoed. So the vetoed part I am showing. So you say fishing, forestry, agribusiness, so they were vetoed. It's up to the BOI to set the SIPP or the Strategic Investment Priorities Plan, or are emerging owing to potential comparative advantage. Next. Tier 2 is easy, includes activity that produce supplies, parts, and components in intermediate services that are not locally produced but are critical to industrial development and import substituting activities, because the Philippines is now a large domestic market with 110 million, and prior to the pandemic, if you follow our trajectory, we could have been the 13th largest, or the well, that's the best, or the 17th largest economy. Um, Next, tier 3 is activities which are more advanced. Our can you hold on a minute? This is from the speaker. Hi, sir. Hello.
Hey, Joey.
Yes.
Joey,
Oh, nasa
can you
webinar
hear
ako.
me?
Oh, yes. So, pati FDA approved investigational drugs, um, etc. So, you know what's vetoed. Next. So, the enhanced deduction, which is my favorite ever since, how I wish everybody goes here. It will also give a lot of job to team up. Is power expense currently allowed deduction is 150%. Labor expense is 150. Bakit? Bakit 100? This compared to the existing ones in the PESA CHESA, no? So instead of 100, if you were not incentivized right now. So this is the difference between the current incentive versus future. Research and development from 100 to 200%. If you buy from Albay, you get 50% more. If you reinvest in manufacturing, currently there's none. Up to 50% of reinvested profit within 5 years from time of reinvestment. And depreciation allowance, none. Now we have 10% for buildings and 20% for its accelerated, no? Accelerated depreciation schedule. Next. And wala yung null ko ah. You forgot. Actually, there's an enhanced null ko. Can you go back there? Actually, there is an enhanced null ko there, which is actually one thing I've done in my whole life that will justify more in infrastructure. Kasi ngayon, may null ko ka under, pero this one extends the enhanced null ko for another 5, no? Christian? they're enhanced by 3 plus 5. So, ang ibig sabihin niyan, kung nagno-null ko kayo ng 3 years, under create, magiging 8. Kasi we prove, the language says that the enhanced null ko flows from. So, yung lugi mo nung first year, you're supposed to, kung hindi mo pa ma-recover, on the fourth year, you can continuously, so that actually, that 8 years enhanced null ko, can I read my paper on the expanded null ko? I can go back to it later. Next. So for GIE recipients right now, they have a sunset provision of 10 years. For ITH and GIE, proceed to 10-year GIE transition. And then for ITH only, just finish your ITH. Next. Tapos na ba? Tax incentives management. Next. So this is pre-create, this Congress, decide incentive package. Now you have FIRB, which oversight and approves tax incentive subsidies sold by. So from yung mga binibenta ng mga IPAs like PESA must comply with or must be within the priority sectors determined by the BOI. Unlike before, yung BOI and APAs are actually of parallel structure. So, parang hindi naman ako masyadong inano ko lang. So, dapat itong FIRB binaba-baba ko. Ano lang to, maling drawing. So, dapat yung Congress na sa taas. Pero ngayon, yung FIRB sa ilalim. So, ano no? So, the power to approve tax incentives for projects or activities with investment capital below 1 billion is being delegated by CREATE to the IPAs. So, hindi nila kailangan dumaan sa FIRB. So, above 1 billion. Pero ang basis ng 1 billion ay actually, laking debate nito, will eventually be TPC or total project cost instead of investment capital, because investment capital excludes operating capital and land. So there was a big debate inside the BICAM. I was fighting for TPC. Of course, the Senate won, but their winning was vetoed. Next. So, special hunting tools for elephant size. So, upon the recommendation of FMR, modify the mix or manner of availment of incentives or craft the appropriate financial support package for highly desirable projects. The grant of ITH shall not exceed 8 years. Thereafter, a seat of 5 may be granted. The period shall not exceed 40 years. Ito po yung kay Presidente, kung malaki, provided that 50 billion or its equivalent, direct employment of 10,000, comprehensive and sustainable development with clear inclusive business approaches and innovation. This criteria shall be reviewed every 3 years by FIRB. Likewise, recommend the cancellation of the grant of the performance targets are not met. The power of the President is suspended during fiscal years when an unmanageable fiscal deficit is declared by the President on the advice of the DBCC. So ito yung tinasabing special powers. So kung malaki, gusto lang nating tapatan yung ginawa ng Vietnam Ski Samsung. So actually, that is the driver or driving motivation for this um, special powers for the president. Next. So, sabi ko kanina, kailangan ang bibigyan lang yung strategic sa atin. So, to be formulated by BOI, kailangan yung makakakuha lang ng incentives ay yung investments na strategic. So, in coordination with the government, etc., kakaroon tayo ng strategic investment priorities plan submitted to the President, shall be terms, scope, coverage, terms, condition of grant with enhanced deductions, valid for 3 years, subject to review and amendment unless there would be a superseding event that would necessitate its review. I hate these words. Basically, ang SIPP, andun din po yung determination ng tiers. I think that would be letter D in number 3. Next. The SIPP may also contain recommendation for non-fiscal support and a consideration of high-skilled jobs to grow local pool of enterprises as well as MSSE. Type of non-fiscal support may offer our facilitation of registration, certification, logistics support, custom product testing, certification, training, upskilling workers, and shared and common service facilities. So I think you can imagine what this can involve. I think that can involve what Gloria Macapagal did to get TI into Clark. So, but the considerations are, there are 5 considerations. Supply to domestic and global value chain, increased sophistication of products and services. Sama ng boses ko ngayon. Expansion of domestic. Ngayon tapos na tong create, parang wala na akong kaano-ano, no? Wala na yung ebullience ko. Attraction significant foreign capital or investment. Next. Consideration in the inclusion of projects and activities in the SIPP. So nandito na ang labanan, nasa BOI, DTI. Substantial amounts of investment, consideration employment, net exports, modern advanced or new technology, processes leading to attainment of the SDG, addressing missing links and gaps in the supply chain, promotion of market competitiveness, enhancement of capabilities of Filipino enterprises and professionals to produce and offer increasingly sophisticated products and services, contribution to food security. Ito nangyari nung kasi habang nagkakaroon tayo ng ASF, I think right now we are importing 15% of our food requirements and bulk of it are smuggled. Like fish, you buy it in China for 50, smuggled into the Philippines for 100, sold to a trader for 120, and you buy it for 180. Same with meat. You buy it actually at 110 pesos. You put VAT and then you get 140. And then you buy it in the market at 240. So I don't know. So we thought that agriculture, despite the structural constraints of lack of suitable land, malay mo meron tayong technology that would could imagine the kind of agriculture that Japan and Korea has, and Taiwan, despite being small but are big exports. services and activity that can promote regional and global operations in the country. Next. Requirements for inclusion in the SIPP. They will forgo a formal evaluation process to determine suitability, projects and activities. Meron ba nilagay mo ba dito yung ano? Yung binito na annex? There was actually an annex which was vetoed. So you would have known immediately what is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Kaso it was vetoed. Para na hard-coded sana yung iba para you don't have to go through all this process. So but ready naman po yung BOI dahil the BICAM was actually amenable to hard coding some of the industries immediately para wala ng hindi nga pala na inayawan ng Senate pala yung annex na proposed namin from Congress. So wala siya, hindi siya vetoed. So only application for project the listed in SIPP shall be accepted. Projects not listed in SIPP shall be automatically disapproved. Next. Amendments to and publication of SIPP. Amendments may be made by BOI to include additional areas, alter any terms of declaration of an investment area, temporarily suspend projects. BOI po ang gagawa ng SIPP. Pero ang SIPP shall be published in at least one newspaper or the official gazette. So, is BOI ready? Well, that's a question. You should have invited the BOI. Pero sabi ko nga kanina, may annexes kami na which Congress during the BICAM, which are the long BICAM. I had 17 BICAM. I almost fainted in the last BICAM. But by fainting, that terminated the BICAM because it was getting too long on the House side. Next. So, tax administration and enforcement. RSU to be subject to regular SIT, but when this is a sticking point that needs to be addressed to comply with the forum harmful tax practices. Ang dami-dami tayong ginagawa ng mga harmful tax practices, especially transfer pricing. No GI seat for domestic enterprises. It is redundant considering PH is one of the largest markets. So ito po yung mga tinanggal namin under the CREATE na wala ng seat or yung GIE. At I think forever also. I think we should list. This is the first time I'm explaining actually to Phoenix, to anyone about my understanding of what we created. Next. So ilagay mo number 3 ang forever because that's a harmful tax. Review rules on creditable withholding tax. So DOF will review rules, regulatory processes for the withholding of creditable tax once every 3 years and direct BIR to amend such rules and regulation that are found adversely and materially adversely impact the taxpayer. So kailangan ibasa batas na rin natin to. Nasa batas ba to? So di na natin kailangan ilagay sa EOPT. Next. Special powers to penalize tax abuse. The Secretary of Finance can order the closure of locators found abusing ecozone privileges, especially smokers, oil. Oh my God. The ecozones are the biggest conduit of smuggling in this country of almost 1 trillion. Mga 357 billion of that is oil. And I suspect there is a pipeline in the seabed that essentially comes from Subic and ends up in the botas. And I think that's where my committee actually is looking at. Even kahit isda, kahit ano dito sa bayanan. And there's also a clawback clause, which is also new. Allows the government to order the refund of tax incentives if there is any misrepresentation in the application just to gain more incentives than deserved. It's almost like a disgorgement. Next. What's next for the House Ways and Means? So, ito yung mga nasa Senate, yung MBUC, yung POGO, yung... Anyway, so we have all these things. So, next. We have Pipita, also in the Senate. The NDS is also in the Senate. General Tax Amnesty. The AOEI. Actually, na-approve ko na to eh. May General Tax Amnesty ako with all three. FATCA, AOEI, and Bank Secrecy Law. So, ibig sabihin, lifting of bank secrecy. Kaso, syempre, hindi gumagalaw. It's in it's in our Committee on Rules. Baka mapagalitan ako ni Madjo. Next. So, the other fiscal reforms, we have now stricter tax enforcement against, kasi merong mga RR na pag-export, walang stamp. So, yun ang ginamit ni Mighty para diretso sa, and stricter enforcement of fuel smuggling, rationalizing import product. Pero hindi na to create eh. So, next, until we end. Improving sustainability of government exposure to ODA, improving PAGCOR and PCSO revenue operations, BIR tax administration. I think that will be the AOPT, especially na yung services ay yung resibo at saka yung invoice lang ang magiging ang gagamitin. Next, I think reduction of contingent liabilities for pension, for military uniform personnel. I think we are now doing that. We are SSS pension reform and PhilHealth sustainability reform. Next. So that ends my presentation. Hindi ko po na-cover lahat kasi biglaan yung ka-approve pa lang nung Sabado eh. Ay, Sabado ba? Ano ba ngayon?
Friday, Your Honor.
Yung Friday. Friday na gabi nilalabas. So, ano ba ngayon? Lunes?
Yes.
Monday.
So, hindi ko, biniglaan nyo lang ako. Pero, if you invite me again, I will have a more refined presentation. So, I would like to thank again Phoenix for this opportunity to explain. Kung ano ba ang meron dito. One, doesn't matter whether you're inside or outside the zone. You can be anywhere in your own current offices. You can get an incentive if it's an SIPP activity. Ecozone don't matter. They are only primarily a promotion agency. Number two, no more forever. So wala nang may sit, may sunset na 10. Number three, although it's only because of fiscal impact, kaya imbis na 10, kung sa ang exit ng if you're a new investor, you are export-oriented, you can get as many as 17 plus 3 plus 2, 22 if you invest in Albay. But if you're for domestic market, you will only get 22 minus 5, 17. So in other words, you get 10 years for exports and 5 years for imports. For simple reason, we have to pay for our food imports. The current structure of the Philippines is such that we are we have reached the structural limits because of our population and our own archipelagic character, as well as our political economy, that I think importation uh, basically will always be part of our national life. So kung iisipin mo, I can name you several industries that could be self-sustaining here, but essentially the country is just right now. That is what Create is trying to address, is to get more domestic productive investments kasi our corporations are too big for our own economy. So they find more opportunities abroad. So what we're trying to do is to essentially incentivize new industries under the SIPP para naman we reduce our so-called broker. Ang ginagawa natin is send cheap labor abroad and buy cheap products from China, buy 50 pesos fish from China, and send our household service worker to Italy to earn $1,000 a day, a month. So basically, that's the traditional. Of course, it's being by BPOs as well as which allows us to So laging may pumapasok kaya I think that is a signal for me to stop. I can go on and on, but I think those are the three key main features of Create as we have designed. So it's not perfect, but I think at least the uncertainty is gone. It was approved in January 23, 2018, approved in the House in 2019. So we must have lost 3 years of direct foreign investment of almost $20 billion. So I expect the same, the postponed direct foreign investments to come back. But of course, siyempre meron dyan yung mga the vaccines will come. I think there's no way that we will not get those vaccines, but you can time your entry, but I think if your only basis is that the vaccine is not yet there, it only affects your current estimates of the near-term GVA or GDP. But in the long term, I think will create. So thank you very much and good day to everyone.
Thank you, Congressman Joey Salceda, for helping us to understand the new Create law more. So at this point, let us welcome our next speaker, DOF Assistant Secretary Maria Teresa Habitan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Congressman Joey Salceda for very almost exceptionally and perfectly laying out the premise for RA 11534, Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, or CREATE. After all, is the very major sponsor of this bill. So thank you very much to Phoenix for inviting the DOF to this briefing. This is a reform 25 years in the making, which is ratified by both houses of Congress last month and signed into law by the President just this Friday. So allow me to begin with a key messages. CREATE has transformed, next slide please. CREATE has transformed not just a tax reform bill, It is also now an economic recovery legislation amid the COVID pandemic. CREATE will provide much needed relief for MSMEs through a reduction in the corporate income tax rate and end investor uncertainty by culminating the years-long discussion on the rationalization of incentives for business. The passage of CREATE strongly projects that the Philippines is back in the game when it comes to attracting investments. With CREATE, the economy will adapt and grow as more quality jobs will be preserved or created while having little to no inflationary effect. CREATE will also help mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and improve the quality of lives of millions of Filipinos through various tax relief measures, which I will discuss later. Actually, Congressman Salceda has already discussed them. Next slide. CREATE is the largest fiscal stimulus for firms in our recent history by providing 1 trillion pesos worth of tax relief over the next 10 years. CREATE introduces an enhanced incentives package that is performance-based, time-bound, targeted, and transparent, and expands the role of the Fiscal Incentives Review Board, or the FIRB, an existing government body, to improve the governance of incentives. I am sure that these principles are not new to PIDEX members, as you have been strong partners of the government in this reform. Through numerous briefings held over the past few years, you have seen how this reform has evolved while maintaining the principles of a good corporate income tax reform. Next slide. We would like to take this chance to thank you for your support. PINEX was among the top business groups that supported this reform and clamored for its passage. Your support sent a strong signal to our legislators and allowed for its urgent passage. CREATE is the product of strong partnerships within and outside government. This is a win to be shared by all Filipinos. Next slide. Allow me now to share the details of the two major components of the reform. The first is the corporate income tax rate reduction, complemented by various COVID tax relief measures, making it a stimulus measure. The second is the modernization or rationalization of fiscal incentives, which addresses the governance of incentives. From having the highest corporate income tax rate or CIT rate of 30%, which is the highest in ASEAN, CREATE reduces that immediately to 20 to 25%, which will be within the range of other ASEAN countries. Next slide. With CREATE, MSMEs registered as domestic corporations will receive the largest ever CIT rate cut in the country's recent history, with an immediate 10 percentage point reduction for businesses with total assets of not more than 100 million pesos and taxable income of 5 billion pesos and below. Domestic corporations that earn a taxable income above 5 million pesos benefit from an immediate reduction of CIT rate from 30% to 25%. Foreign corporations will also pay a lowered rate of 25% CIT. For non-resident foreign corporations, the lowered rate will be enjoyed effective January 1, 2021. As temporary relief, the percentage tax rate for non-VAT taxpayers has been reduced from 3 to 1% from July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2023. The minimum corporate income tax rate has also been reduced from 2 to 1% over the same period for all corporate income taxpayers. Next slide. Proprietary, nonprofit educational institutions and hospitals also benefit significantly from the reduction from 10% to 1% of the special income tax rate for July 1, 2020 up until June 30, 2023. Regional operating headquarters, meanwhile, will continue to enjoy their 10% special rate until the end of this year and be subject to the regular CIT starting next year if it does not apply for other incentives under CREATE. The special rate for ROHQs has been flagged by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and not repealing this special treatment could result in blacklisting of the Philippines with detrimental effects on our overseas Filipinos in their financial transactions. Foreign source dividends received by domestic corporations will now be tax exempt, subject to reinvestment of earnings in the Philippines. The improperly accumulated earnings tax, or IAET, has been repealed by CREATE. Next slide. Various tax relief measures other than income tax cuts have also been introduced with the enactment of CREATE. From January 1, 2021 to December 31, 2023, the sale and importation of capital equipment and raw materials for PPE production, all prescription drugs, medical supplies, and devices and equipment for COVID-19, and vaccines for COVID-19 are VAT exempt. Next. Electronic books and the sale and importation of prescription drugs and cancer, mental illness, tuberculosis, and kidney-related diseases are now also tax exempt moving forward. Now we proceed to the second major component of CREATE, which is the fiscal incentives rationalization reform. In summary, all businesses applying for tax incentives will continue to deal with investment promotion agencies, or IPAs. Approval of incentives will be done by the IPAs unless the proposed project or activity exceeds an investment capital threshold of 1 billion pesos. Above this threshold, applications for incentives will be decided on by the Fiscal Incentives Review Board, an interagency cabinet-level body to oversee the grant of fiscal incentives. All IPAs and registered business enterprises, these are businesses receiving tax incentives, will be subject to the oversight of the FIRB. The FIRB is modeled after similar agencies in other countries, such as Malaysia and Singapore. The FIRB will promote transparency, accountability, good governance, and participation in the grant of tax incentives, and ensure that the Filipino people get bang for their buck in the incentives granted to businesses in exchange for jobs, technology, and value added to the economy. There will be a single list of strategic priorities for investments called the Strategic Investment Priorities Plan, or SIPP, to be defined by the Board of Investments versus the current system where different IPAs have different priorities. An income tax holiday of 4 to 7 years may be granted to firms applying for incentives, depending on location and industry. This is slightly longer than the 4 to 6 year ITH period previously offered by the government. However, ITH extensions will no longer be given under CREATE. Instead, there will be additional incentives for relocation outside of NCR or in disaster or conflict areas. Next slide. The special corporate income tax rate of 5% on gross income earned, or GIE, for exporters is retained under CREATE. This is the first option that exporters can avail of after their ITH, instead of enjoying this tax perk forever. Though exporters under CREATE may only enjoy this incentive for an initial period of 10 years, which may be extended by another 10 years. However, we would like to note that this is a generous compromise, given that earlier versions of this reform propose shorter GIE incentive periods at a higher rate. The GIE incentive is not applicable to domestic market or domestic-oriented enterprises, as this would give them undue advantage over Filipino companies that are not receiving incentives but catering to the same market. Altogether, exporters receiving incentives may enjoy tax perks for up to 17 years. Throughout the incentive period, firms will continue to enjoy VAT and duties exemptions for importation of capital equipment, spare parts, and supplies. The other option that firms can avail of after the ITH are enhanced deductions. We will discuss this in the following slide. But in general, exporters may enjoy this tax perk for 10 years after the ITH, while domestic-oriented enterprises may enjoy this perk for 5 years after their ITH. Next slide. Businesses receiving the enhanced deductions incentive will be subject to the prevailing corporate income tax rate, but they are allowed larger deductions as a percentage of their expenses. This has been very thoroughly explained earlier by Congressman Salceda, so I shall move on. Under CREATE, the President may also grant extraordinary incentives for up to 40 years to investments that meet certain conditions. These super investments that we also want to attract are those that provide considerably high levels of jobs, training, technology, and other forms of value added. Altogether, CREATE makes the Philippines' fiscal incentives very generous and at par with packages offered by other countries. For businesses currently receiving incentives, CREATE provides a long transition period. For businesses currently enjoying the ITH incentive, CREATE will allow them to finish their ITH as scheduled. Existing firms under the 5% GIE incentive will be allowed to enjoy the incentive for 10 more years. This is another very generous compromise on the side of the government and our legislative champions, as the transition period in past versions of the reform were much shorter and depended on how long the GIE incentive was being enjoyed. Create mandates all IPAs to establish a one-stop shop to facilitate the setting up and conduct of projects or activities, including coordination with LGUs and other government agencies, compliant with the Ease of Doing Business Law of 2018. Enterprises may continue to avail of the one-stop shop facility even after expiration of the incentives. This will help ensure that all IPAs perform their role of promoting investment and job creation efficiently and effectively. My presentation ends here. This briefing is by no means exhaustive, so if you have any questions, please feel free to raise them in the open forum in the chat box or email us at doftaxreform@dof.gov.ph. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, DOF Assistant Secretary Tessa Bitan, for your insights on the CREATE law. So now we go to the most exciting part of the program, our question and answer portion, which will be moderated by another tax luminary. She is the president of the Asia Oceania Tax Consultants Association, or AYOTCA, a past president of the Tax Management Association of the Philippines, or TMAP, our executive vice president here in Phoenix, and the liaison director of the Phoenix Tax and Legal Committee. So ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome to this afternoon's Q&A our moderator, Attorney Yuni Marie Mata Perez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. And I'd like to really thank Congressman Joey Salceda, Assistant Secretary Tessa Bitan, for giving us the honor this afternoon. This webinar is indeed very timely. There are so many are interested in what has been presented. We have, for the record, we have about 800 participants listening to us via Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook. And so it just shows how many people are interested and how many questions are there on the floor. But may I throw the first two questions? Okay, Congressman, two questions for me. Number one, I mentioned this earlier to you. Your House Bill 4157 goes down to 20% in 2030 or 2029. Now we're happy we got the 20% for MSMEs, but we're still the highest. We're still at the highest of 25 in the Asian region. So my question is, what do you think? How will this make our country competitive, considering that the most attractive countries now, like Vietnam, is at 20%? So I'll just ask two so I can finish. The second question I want to ask is, you were talking about harmful practices earlier. The House version had an amendment to Section 50, giving teeth on the transfer pricing powers of the government, or the BIR. I don't know why Section 50 was not included in this. It was not included in the Senate, and it was not included in the final bill. But with the advent of transfer pricing, you ask me as a lawyer, the BIR has no teeth. It was not implemented. My first two questions, before I go to the panels, there's so many questions on administration, calculation, etc. And by the way, I also would like to welcome Assistant Commissioners Larry Barcelo and Anita Kimosing. They're here, and we're happy that they're here to answer administrative.
I'll answer now.
Yes, please. My first two questions.
Yung 20% is only hindi yun yung sa pag binaba natin yun sa 20, yung mga Pilipino na nagpo-produce sa abroad, yun ang ma-incentivize mo na bumalik dito. So tama na sana may balik sa 20. Kaso inabutan nga tayo ng mga what you can call Um, pero ang pakiramdam ko diyan ibabalik yung next admin ibababa yan sa 20 pero hindi na yung 1% per year. So pwede namang 25 kaysa I think that 25 from an NPV basis versus 1% per year for 10 years. I think the advantage is one big bang is already is a pretty good incentive already for domestic corporations to stay home and provide them with extra fiscal savings which they can reinvest. So mga 150 billion on the first year ang masisave nila. So based sa SEC, most of them, if it's not pandemic, they will use that for reinvestment or capital investment. Although ngayon, di ko alam, dahil mababa ang market, baka, well, ini-introduce ko sana to na bawal ang buyback doon sa savings, pero unenforceable eh. Paano mo babantayan yung ilan? Ilang libo ba yan? 1,000 korporasyon. So, mahirap i-enforce. So, doon sa transfer pricing model, sa transfer pricing, nandun yun sa akin. Problema ay wala doon sa Senate. I will give it, I'd rather compromise on the other areas rather than on the, but I think there will be a time to deal with the transfer pricing controls, which were initially in the original CITIRA. So actually, ang iniisip ko nga doon kung nung ibinaba ako sa 5 years lang, now I'm talking about incentives. Imbis ng 10, ginawa kong 5. It's more because of fiscal impacts. Tapos yung same with the fact that yung hindi namin ibinaba diretso sa 20, disruptive masyado, kailangan ng pera. Hindi na nga tayo makapagbayanihan 3 eh. Kasi because it shows what I can call a fragile underbelly. Kanina dinidescribe ko sa iyo yung political economy ng Pilipinas. Kung pati isda kulang tayo, kalahating milyon na metric tons, or let's say 5 billion fish. I know. Yeah, 5 billion kilos of fish. Wala tayo. 2.4 million 2.24 billion kilos of rice. And we also need 700,000 metric ton times 1,700 million na baboy. So, kailangan natin ng konting, we need, the issue there is balance. But I think once we strengthen and fortify our own domestic market fundamentals, so create is not perfect, but it is imbued with realism. But I think I'd rather go with this compromise than prolong the uncertainty.
Thank you. There's so many questions on calculation. When is there, maybe this is to the BIR, there's a question of, is there a plan to extend the April 15 deadline? Because the create was just past Friday. I understand that it's not yet published in the OG official gazette today, but I understand it was published in the Business Mirror last Saturday. I haven't seen it though. So if you count 15 days from March 27, it's effective April 12. So is there a plan to extend the April 15 deadline? Maybe can I ask one of the assistant commissioners, Larry?
Barcelo.
Good afternoon, sir.
The answer is no.
The issue on whether to extend is actually essentially a policy issue. We're waiting for the advice from our principals, from our MANCOM, and of course from our DOF principals on whether to extend the filing.
So create, thank you so much. Create is effective 15 days from publication. But there are provisions that are made effective July 1, 2020. So we assume that all other provisions will be effective only when the law becomes effective, right? Which is 15 days from March 12th, from March 27th, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. But there are provisions there that specify as a particular date on the effectivity.
Before I go to the administration questions again, I'd like to ask, so Congressman and Assistant Secretary, I don't know if you can freely comment on this, but let us know. So what do you think of the veto of the president?
The what?
What do you think of the provisions that the president vetoed upon on the overall?
Yung yung nilabang ko lang ang hindi na veto eh. Ako wala akong veto. From the House side, we have no veto.
I do have one comment there. I noticed in the bill, in the law, that those granted legislative franchises are excluded from the FIRB's jurisdiction. Is that correct? So,
Tama.
so which means
Special law kasi eh.
special law. So hindi while we are rationalizing incentives, putting them under the FIRB's jurisdiction, putting them in the tax code, there could still be outliers, different kinds of incentives if Congress so desires. And then what will be the supervisory powers na there of the DOF over those?
Kasi ang inayos lang namin yung binibigay ng IPA. Ang legislative franchise binigay ng Congress. So the entire exercise is about the IPA's grant of certain incentives.
So
but these incentives were granted directly by Congress to specific corporations.
They will stay, right? And
Congress. Bigyan kita an example, yung franchise ng AeroCity. Ang taxation doon, anything about 12% IRR, and this is the first time it's used, goes to the government. Assuming that Lamon Ang earns 18%, the entire 6% goes back to government. So it's a very specific franchise designed to achieve a very specific, to have a new airport. Nobody, the 780 billion, I don't think the government can will just, una, the process is too long. Second, the money we have to raise, there are other priorities. So the way we structure the franchise granted to AeroCity, and this is the first time we're using WACC and IRR. It's even the PSA that's now in the Senate. I almost introduced Modigliani Miller and the capital asset pricing model to determine the appropriate returns beyond which anything goes back to government. So in other words, if you go beyond it and you retain it, we will disgorge you. So that's very specific in the law. So yung legislative franchise are of particular nature.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions on how to calculate the tax.
Di man pwede average.
Oo nga. Although the law says equally, so maybe...
Equally ba?
Yeah.
Yes, the law says equally. There's a specific provision in the law to calculate the tax, but there's still so many questions How do you
Alin yung retroactive? Yung up July to December 31?
taxes in 2020? The 30% and the 25% or 20%. So how do you allocate the entire income for 2020?
May equally ba? Tere? Parang hindi ko alala may equally.
It says here, in case of corporations adopting the fiscal accounting period, the taxable income shall be computed without regard to the specific date when the specific sales, purchase, and other transactions occur.
Yeah.
The income and expenses shall be deemed to have been spent equally for each month of the period.
Nasa tax code po yan.
Yes, it's in the law. It's in the law. And so the corporate income tax rate shall be applied on the amount computed by multiplying the number of months covered by the new rate with the fiscal year by the taxable income divided by 12. Is this not clear enough? Maybe the...
clear enough. Binasa ko ulit.
Yes.
Wala naman disruptive yan. I think it's a reasonable provision.
Kaya nga po, actually, in-explain, na we have in our proposed RR, yung pong rates na namin. So the rate for example, for those domestic corporations which are subject to 25% starting July, so ang average niya is 30 and 25. That would be average for one calendar year of 27.5%. Now for those 20, the average is, as long as they are into calendar year, is 25%. And then also yung MCIT, 1%. Now for those into proprietary non-profit educational institution, as well as ang average niya is around 5. Now, taxpayers who are years, meron po kami dun sa namin na mga rates. Yes. Doon po sa ating proposal.
Equally. Is that the way it is?
Yeah.
You average
Yes po.
rate and then you apply it to all the months.
Yes. So, yung sinabi po ng law na equally for each month of the 12-month period of the taxable year. So equal, para bang it's the income is earned, expenses are incurred equally for the month period.
But we average the rate. And this applies to
Yes.
both income tax and MCIT.
Yes.
Okay, that answers that question. Ang daming question about it. Maybe the question is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Asir Larry and Asir Lenny here are in the forefront of drafting the regs. So they are the persons we wrote to the commissioner, and they said it's this. We have the two best persons in BIR, and if you have no comments, it's the time to comment and suggest. We will also summarize the comments later. Okay, so that answers the calculation. Okay, so the MCIT. Ma'am, answer Larry, would you have an idea when the IRR would be available? Because there's already we have April 15, but we haven't seen what will be followed by April 15. Wala pang IRR.
We are actually finalizing the IRR. There's already the IRR draft and konti na lang pinapinalize. And this will be released in time also with the sana effectivity of the law para ano.
So before your target for March 12 bang deadline?
Yes.
Sana naman extend. Extend. People are, well, it seems simple. There are many other questions. So MCIT, that's answered. Now, there's a lot of question about the real property, which was provision, which was vetoed by the president. There's a comment that it might affect. Let me read the comments. What do you think can be done for the housing industry? The VAT provisions for housing in the CREATE was vetoed by the president. Housing sector has always been utilized to pump prime the economy. The multiplier effect is some 3.14% as there are more than 80 industries attached to housing. Further, it provides employment and can address some 5% of the employment requirement of the country. The veto on the housing sector provisions will push up the price of housing, both horizontal and vertical projects, and will affect the affordability of the people, especially the lower income groups, to buy a house of their own. May I know what our esteemed speakers think about it? It's not a question, it seems to be a statement asking for your comment.
Yung DOF, sila nag-formulate dito message.
Well, we recognize housing as a very good generator of jobs and also yung downward linkages niya. Marami siyang upward and downward linkages. However, the real incentive that we want to provide is for the low-cost housing. What the CREATE bill did, or the law, or this recently enacted law, proposed was to bump up the ceiling of what is from 2.1 to 4.2 million pesos. And to our thinking, this is no longer low-cost housing. Medyo affordable na siya to
socialized versus low-cost yan. You're describing low-cost. Actually, we are promoting socialized housing.
Okay, so it's a socialized housing.
The description refers to 2.3 to 4.2. That's low-cost housing.
Yeah, that's low-cost housing.
Yes. Parang mukha lang siyang low-cost, pero 4.2 million, that's the model amount for condo. Yung mga lunchbox, yung buong Metro Manila, punong-puno.
Yeah.
So, you want to exempt condos from VAT?
No.
Kung low-cost, yes. From socialized, yes. Low-cost, not so.
I remember there was the tax code at a lower threshold even before CREATE, and then by regulation it was increased by the BIR and the DOF.
Yeah.
So in fact, when train was passed, it set a lower rate than what was in the regulation. The regulation was already 3.9, and then it went back to
2.5. Yeah.
So now maybe the question is there a possibility that later, if the BOF will review, I haven't read the complete, there are so many provisions in the law, which I admire also, Congressman, that allows adjustment based on market or based on indices, right? Which we need because the rates we won't get antiquated, their powers. But I didn't see this power in the VAT. So can the DOF and BIR later increase the ceilings for the housing by regulation? It did it before.
Illegal yun. Unless allowed by law.
Allowed by law.
Allowed yun but
allowed by law. Dito hindi. It was
wala akong nakitang provision in this section allowing adjust. There are many provisions in this new law which allows adjustments and review based on,
Pero may basis.
My basis. Always may basis. But
tapos,
from being pegged forever for a certain rate, diba? But wala
tapos may lodgement ng determination. And yun, open. Sino? BIR na lang, basta na lang ibababa, itataas. Hindi naman po pwede yun. Hindi na yun. Rule of law. Rule of BIR.
Okay.
Rule of Larry.
After the veto, we go back to the existing law. Okay. Wala sa akin yung existing law.
Train
1. Ano
go back to train.
Go back to train 1.
Go back to train.
2.5 and 1.5 if I recall. Sorry, hindi ko lang. Anyway, basta just go back to train 1 kasi na-veto So, hindi let me memorize. There are other. Can I go back to the calculation? Is the averaging applicable to the percentage tax?
Hindi, CIT lang.
No, No, CIT lang
CIT.
po.
CIT lang. And when can we have now the updated returns forms?
There's no need to update the forms. The existing forms are good in itself. It's only the that should be updated. So, pwede naman yun na ikaw na lang maglalagay na the rates. Now, in the case of those that are electronic, like for example, EFPS or forms, we're going to relax that so that the taxpayer can input the right rate.
Manually? Paano? Electronic?
Input po nila. Pwede naman po. I-relax nga po namin yung
Siguro, ma'am,
the
I don't know if the BIR is considering this time. Well, we really hope that the deadline would be extended. I hope we could lobby for that. Number two, I hope we can relax some filing requirements like different venues. You know?
I think the thing there is remediation. You will be allowed to if you make a wrong return, you will be allowed to correct it with no penalty. Di ba, Larry?
The right naman to amend is there naman sa taxpayer. But
at least you're allowed to correct if it's wrong.
you can always amend.
No problem, you will have extra credit. But if it's underpayment, I hope there's no penalty. Can that be done?
Parang there will be no underpayment, ma'am. Kasi
bumaba.
So, parang wala namang underpayment. More of overpayment.
Because tumaas yung, lumit yung rate. So most likely, they might pay the higher.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I have 60 questions. I'm going to die. I am just I am grouping them kasi pare-pareho. Will the enhanced NOLCO be effective prospectively?
Pero Larry, yung venue restriction,
Sir.
napaka-irrational yan. Nasa EOPT yan. Ease of paying taxes. So
Yes,
kahit saan, yung pinakamalapit, tigil-tigilan na muna yun na ito, KRDO. Kung anong malapit doon, I think the venue restrictions are one of the most irrational features of the current BIR tax paying system. It's in the EOPT. You can pay anywhere.
There's a question. Many companies already filed, especially the publicly listed companies, they already filed audited financial statements by February. So they should probably amend.
Goodbye sila. 2 years ang refund system ng BIR.
Refund, sir, or they may claim also for tax credit.
Madali ba tax credit? Madali ba tax credit?
Pareho lang po ng refund. But they may also carry it over to the next period. Yun po pinakamadali. Carry over.
Pero yung VAT refund ni Ramon ang inabot kayo hanggang ngayon di pa tapos 3 taon na.
So can I go back to that? So if they overpaid, because assuming they filed the return in February using 30%, we go to the general rate, the general rule of refund, hindi carry over in 2021 yung excess?
Yeah, they may, the option po of the taxpayer, they may claim for refund, or they may have a tax credit certificate, or they may also carry it over to the next period.
In 2021?
So, pinakamadali po, i-carry over. Yes, i-carry over. Pinakamadali.
Credit for 2021 first quarter.
Yes. May nabasa ako, bakit lalo daw magulo? Maraming tanong. Simple lang po kasi ginawa namin retroactive. Kung gusto namin padaliin to, tanggalin namin yung retroactive, kalahati ng tanong mo, tapos na. Sige, tanggalin natin yung retroactive.
Masaya kami. Pasalamat kami na nag-retroactive.
Kaya nga, bakit
okay lang. Let's make it
nagre-reklamo pa ba't maraming tanong?
2021.
Dahil sa retro. Kung ayaw nyo ng retro, bayaran nyo ng buo. And donation to government. Itapos. Tatigilin nyo na pagtatanong yan. Napaka-clear. Sinabi na namin na pag dyan, July 1, benching ko na lang. I-average mo na lang. Tapos yun ang ibabayaran mo. Ngayon, kung naguguluhan ka pa, eh, di balik natin sa 30.
Hindi na sir, touch move.
Oh.
Hindi
Eh,
na.
ang arte-arte naman kasi naman nagtatanong eh. Gusto lang makapagtanong eh. Kung ang napakasimple naman ang, sabi, bakit lalong gumulo? Eh, binabasa ko lahat ng mga Q&A dito eh. Hindi ho siya magulo. May retroactive, kaya gumugulo. Di alisin natin yung retro.
Our panelists have access to all the questions. Kaya ako nagtatanong.
I'm reading all of them. And ito kasi mga taga-DOF, wala naman yan, retro na yan.
Ayaw nga namin yun.
Ayaw may gusto. Ayaw may gusto dahil ayaw nyo magbigay ng stimulus.
Okay, let's go.
Ito na yung stimulus.
Hopefully the IRR will come out before March 12 and the calculation is discussed. Now let's go back to the incentive, which I also like. Now with the incentives being the same for all IPAs, what happens to the status of the free port zones and special economic zones? I think we discussed this already. You answered this.
Wala, ito na yun.
Right?
On 15 days from now, kailan ba yun? April 13? April 13 ba?
12? April 12?
They will offer the same incentives in and out of the zone. Kahit ka po nasa kalukluk-lukan ng Tawi-Tawi, kung ang ginagawa mo ay strategic investment, you will get the incentive. Zona location is irrelevant.
So there's no outside customs territory.
Yun lang natitira. Ibig sabihin, natitirang advantage mo ng konti. Pero yun din ang source ng lahat ng smuggling sa buong Pilipinas. I can show you proofs. Oil, fish,
so I have a question.
Cigarettes.
If the tax,
and it's well documented. Ya dapat pati yan tanggalin eh. Pero
so,
basta lahat ng smuggling dyan dumadaan eh. Sa ecozone. Ang kanila namang ini-smuggle, ang natitipid lang nila 12% VAT. Kasi halos lahat naman yan eh. It's either malum prohibitum like cigarettes, therefore may excise, o yung mga ordinaryong produkto kung saan binababa nila yung valuation. Kaya nga, pero hindi naman ako antay na ganun. Pero ang sinasabi ko lang, karamihan ng mga smuggling nasa ecozone.
Is there now a plan for Congress to override the items the President vetoed?
Yung akin, wala man ako nabito eh, kaya wala akong i-override. Lahat na na-override, lahat na nabito sa Senate yun.
Thank you so much. There was one veto on the definition of investment capital.
Ay, dati ko nang nilaban na PPC. Gustong-gusto ng senador, IC.
In fact, I just before this talk, pinatingnan ko saan ginamit yung term ng investment capital. And they were used also on the provisions that were vetoed. The one that, yung critical and the 500 million. So ang naiwan na lang na term that's used na lang for the investment capital where the president will exercise his power. And yata yung isa. So,
may investment capital pa ba sa loob ng batas?
Meron pa po.
Oh?
Yes. Dun sa power ng president. Teka ha.
Naduling yata. Naduling yung
50 billion, section 301, it's still
yun, yung 50 billion.
Yes. Pero yung iba, at saka dun sa...
Pero alam mo, ano yun?
Pesos
alam mo, positive to the state yun. Kaya mo ginagawang TPC yan para isama yung lupa, pati yung operating cost. So it's easy to meet. Now, by using IC, it will be more difficult to meet the 50 billion if you don't include the land. The problem
Yeah,
is,
so if you
the problem
that
is,
means you have
well, lahat naman dito may tax practice. The problem with investment capital is that it excludes land and pre-operating costs. And that is not faithful to actual tax practice. Huwag kayong mag-alala, i-define na lang ng BIR yan sa ano, paki-ano nga, yung TPC, kaya nga wala nang ano ng TPC, kaya na mag-define.
it
Kasi
was also used on
nag-away,
the 1 billion threshold. So twice na lang siya naiwan sa 50 billion at saka sa 1 billion threshold. Wala na siya dun sa 500 million tsaka critical industries.
sa IC.
Hmm.
Kaya yun, kasi ganito, para mas mahirap, kaya nga, kung TPC kasi, ang usapan doon, sabi ko, gawin na natin 3 billion, hindi ka nadadaan FIRB, pero TPC, kasama lupa at of working capital. Inayawan ng Senado, gusto nila IC. So it essentially allows, basically the bias is towards FIRB evaluation. IC, the way it was retained in the law.
There is another question for DOF. I think this is about operations, ma'am. Is the FIRB ready to handle a large flow of exporter fiscal incentives application? The 1 billion threshold was vetoed. So very soon the IPAs will be required to get FIRB approvals. Is this correct?
Di man binito, dinelegate lang.
PEZA has given them a one-stop shop and red carpet. FIRB can quickly get a bad reputation if it is slow and bureaucratic. So, what's the 1 billion?
The 1 billion was not vetoed.
It wasn't right. What was vetoed was the power of the
Yeah,
power to revoke.
The limitation of the power of FIRB to exercise certain functions, such as oversight. Yes.
Revoke, but the threshold, it's still that
So,
low billion is still going.
So below that, the IPAs will still approve.
So PESA will still approve and provide.
Yes. And hopefully PESA and all the other IPAs will exercise talagang true review and evaluation of the projects.
Yeah, what was vetoed, I noticed this na in the law, why was it carved out? The power of the FIRB, the functions, only the function, what was vetoed was a provision which is the functions of the FIRB. Certain sections shall be exercised only for investments more than 1 billion. So meaning these powers could not be exercised below 1 billion. And this
so na-veto siya. So ibig sabihin
to withdraw, to require reports, to decide on issues.
Attorney, huwag mo na pahirapan sarili mo.
Kumbaga,
ang sinasabi lang niya na below 1 billion IPA, above 1 billion
FIRB.
Yeah, but the power has the power to like still withdraw, revoke, require reports on those below 1 billion.
Yeah, may oversight.
Yeah, because that was the effect of veto. Because the provision seems to say, basta anything below 1 billion, walang pakialam ang FIRB. That was my reading when I read the law. Kung ano na trabaho ng FIRB, konti na lang pala. Kasi naiwan pa rin sa IPAs lahat ng below 1 billion.
Average naman nila 650
Oo.
Ang arte-arte naman nila.
Oo. So FIRB still has power.
1 billion, eksakto-sakto na yun sa kanila.
Okay, so let me see. I hope
pero kung pumayag yung Senado, 3 billion sana, 3 TPC. Ayaw.
Oh, there's another question on averaging. For the interest arbitrage, which has been decreased to 20%, do we also average the rate?
Yes. SMEs, they should.
Okay.
O, ubos na.
So there's a question, domestic corporations entitled to 20% CIT. Domestic lang yung may 20 eh. But foreign corporations, even resident foreign
Lagyan ba
corporations
natin ang domestic? Yung SMEs?
are not granted the 20%. Do you know why hindi equally treated ang domestic corporations at resident foreign corporations? Kasi yung resident foreign corporations may branch.
Resident foreign corporation is also taxable at the.
Are they entitled to 20%? Mukhang hindi.
MSMEs.
No. No. Hindi sila
The domestic are entitled to 20%.
I will correct
No.
that in another law.
Thank you. Because diba, one of the principles of taxation is to be equally uniformly applied to those similarly situated. We noted that already. Thank you, Congressman. Magaling ka talaga sa tax. I'm
Hindi
so
ako
glad.
magaling sa tax. Turo yan ng mga Jesuita. Philosophy of 104. What's good for one should be good for all. It's not good for all.
Take note,
Don't do it at all.
in our wish list to amend to include 20%, to extend the 20% to resident foreign corporation. Pag non-resident, medyo iba na usapan doon, di ba? Regarding Section 40C2, it was mentioned that ito yung tax-free ruling exchange. This was already mentioned in Train 1 that under the VAT provision that it does not require, it's not subject to VAT. But it was mentioned that confirmatory ruling is no longer required. And this is supported by CTA cases. Administratively, will the confirmatory ruling be likewise dispensed with for purposes of securing the car? Because ang issue nito is the Register of Deeds will not issue or transfer property without the car. So while theoretically it said that the ruling is not required, but how can we get a CAR, which we will need to submit to the Register of Deeds? Maybe it's a question to us here.
Yan ang hindi ko expertise.
Yes, ma'am. We will include that in the revenue regulations to be issued. No? How this issuance of car will be operationalized without the tax exemption ruling.
Thank you so
Because
much.
now it's clear that there's no more BIR confirmation or tax ruling. And parties can proceed to implement their transactions to include getting car, of course, for the transfer of their property. But we will have to include some measures to ensure that the requirements of Section 40C2, particularly on the annotations of the basis, the historical costs, and the substituted basis of the properties are complied with by the parties concerned. We will include that in the revenue regulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, because we need that. And I hope you apply it to all existing pending rulings in the BIR. That will declare your...
We will study that because there may be some as one of the measures, there may be some post-audit transactions to be conducted. And when we say some audit, then we'll have to follow the rule on prescription. Existing rulings may not be we'll have to.
Tanggalin mo na lang. Tinanggal na di tanggalin mo rin yung car.
No more ruling. The clear is there no more rulings, sir.
Yeah, just go, tanggalin mo na para clear. Para walang trabaho mga abogado.
Yes, sir.
Simplification. So, faster pa. Nasa EODB pati yan.
There's a question on the withholding tax rates. With the lowering of the corporate rate, will there be, do we expect some review and revisions on the withholding tax regulations? Sir Larry.
There's also a corresponding amendments on the withholding tax regulations pertaining to some items on the passive income that are subject of final withholding tax, like the sale of shares of stocks not traded all taxpayers are now treated at the rate of 15%. No? Yung resident, corporation, non-resident.
I think, sure, the CWT is the issue. Like, we know we have consultants who could be withheld at as high as 15. The tax rate is already 20 for SMM, SME. So that's very high for, and most of these consultants could even be just also very small MSMEs, individual practitioners. Ang taas ng withholding tax nila. So that could result to overpayment of withholding tax. Is there I hope that there's a question here or a suggestion if the BI were considering lowering the rates of some of it in view of the lowering of the income tax rate to 20% for MSMEs.
Pag binasa mo create, meron akong sinaksak doon that the DOF should review all rules with withholding tax once every 3 years. Considering that we changed the law, then there must be appropriate changes in the rules. I think we are due for the first review. Kailan ba, Barcelo? It is mandated there.
Yes, sir. It reads.
Yes, sir.
Review at least once every 3 years.
They are included in the law.
And the first review is this year. This year.
We will volunteer to help, sir.
Together with the DOF, sir, they will conduct a review of the CWT rules, and if there's a need to amend.
Galing yan sa amin.
Mataas yung 15%, sir. Kung 20% na lang yung rate. Diba?
Pwede ba yun?
Oo. Mataas yun. Mataas yun. Magkakaroon ng excess. So, mag-refund. So,
we have 3-year interest-free money, di ba, BIR? Kasi it takes them 3 years to refund.
Meron bang oil sa tier 2? There's a question.
Pero ako, Marcelo, siyempre, nung 30 yon yung withholding 15. Ngayon 20 na, ang withholding dapat 10.
Yes. Mataas masyado yung...
Hindi, hindi. Kaya mataas kay mga bababa, wala akong pakialam. Yan ang logic. Kung dating 30, 15 ang withholding, dapat ngayon 20, ang withholding 10.
Congressman.
Yan ang turo ng mga iswita sa akin eh. Kaya napapadali ang mga paggawa ng batas.
Yeah, so here, there are many questions in EWT. So now you heard it. It will be reviewed, and we're glad that the BR is here also, so that.
No, it's not reviewed. I'm asking Larry, make it 10 because it's based on 20. It was 15 when it was based on 30. Kailangan pa bang i-spelling yan?
So,
simple.
There's a question here: withholding tax interest on loans too high at 20. This is no longer 20. This is 15%, right? Because under the train 1, walang rate higher than 15%. So there's more than 20% withholding tax rate on local loans. Pag foreign loans, yes. 20%. Ako nang sumagot. Congressman, let me read a comment. Okay. Generally, create law will make the taxpayers happy with the reduced tax rates. No matter how confusing and complex it will cost the recomputation of the amount of tax, it will not change the kind of relief it will bring us. Thanks, Congressman Salceda. This is the sexiest tax law by far. Sexiest, stimulating, appealing, and exciting. You saw that comment? Anonymous lang niya, tinilang ko sino.
Kinakaya mo pa. Paano ko maniniwala?
No, yes, despite the administrative nightmare, or that's not called.
Wala namang nightmare, kayo lang gumagawa ng nightmare nyo eh.
Issues lang. We are grateful for this bill and for the timely passage.
Pero yung pagdating dun sa... Sige.
there's a general, there are many comments talaga on the easing the filing requirements, including can we do away with venue? Can we do away? Some banks though are requiring SPAs before representatives can file and pay.
Meron naman sa EOPT.
Oo, pwede ba daw for this time i-do away muna in some documents? So there is this general call to, well, number one, the general call to extend the deadline, and if not, to ease the requirements. So we just hope PIR will consider. There is here, and I want also to read this.
Alam mo, hindi na-create ang mga tanong nyo, ha? EOPT na yan.
Ease of doing business.
No, ease of paying taxes. There is a law approved already. It's already in the floor. It's now being debated.
Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you. So, any other question on
Ay, salamat. Naubusan.
Hindi na madami, pero ayaw mo na ng
Hindi, okay lang ako. Walang problema.
Basahin ko lang tong isa, ha? Well, there are some questions about these petroleum refineries. Why skip the provision exempting local? This is this is citing a report from Action for Economic Reforms. Why skip the provision exempting local petroleum refineries from paying taxes and duties on crude oil?
Kasi simple lang yan. Pag pumasok sa buong Asia, tayo lang naman na nagtatax upon importation. Kasi pagpasok ng oil, kung anik-anik ang lumalabas dyan, may NAFTA, tax, VAT-free, may kung ano-ano pang iba. Hindi naman lahat yun. Sa Singapore, actually, may ginagawa sila, nire-ring fence nila. Pangalawa, yung nangyayari dyan, refund. So, halimbawa, katulad rin halimbawa nitong nandito sa Limay, nag-e-export siya. So pagpasok dyan, magre-refund. Ito naman mga taga-BIR, inaabot na 3 taon. So may stranded cost na 10 billion. Yung the only refinery is still standing in this country. Well, sabi ng DOF, magiging obsolete. Hindi yan magiging obsolete in the next 10 years. Pero, pangalawa, paano kung bumagsak ang presyo ng langis? Sino mag-i-import? Bumagsak yung crudo. Pwede mo ba ibenta yung crudo sa gasoline station? Practical lang ako. Ang problema dyan, BIR, kung marunong mag-refund, kahit tanggalin yung kahit ibalik yung dati, ang problema, pakabayad mo upon importation, i-refund nila after 3 years.
So iba nataano lang sa refund.
Ito, di 10 billion ang outstanding refund. Yun na lang ang nakatayo, nagsara na Caltex, nagsara na Shell. Pwede ba isang country na walang refinery? Pag nagsara yan, wala na tayong refinery. Pag bumagsak ang presyo ng langis, sino bibili ng crudo?
Anong oras ito? Oh, 4:00 na pala tayo. Sorry. Closing remarks na. So anyway, sorry, I was... So anyway, I think I ran out of questions already. And if there are other questions, we just note them, no? But I think I've captured generally. So can I call now on this is such an exciting discussion. Thank you so much. But I would like to call on our president, Attorney Francis Edlin, to make the formal closing remarks. Or Lina, sorry, I did your job. Okay.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Magandang hapon sa inyo lahat. Magandang hapon, Kong Joey. Thank you, Tess, ASEC Tess Kabahabitan, and our 2 panelists from the BIR, Larry and Barry, for the very interesting discussion. First of all, I'd like to thank Congress and the President for this CREATE Act, which, as Congressman Joey said, is not only a tax measure envisioned to make the country competitive, or at least less uncompetitive, but also a relief and stimulus package to help our businesses and economy address the devastating effect of the pandemic. As noted by ASECTES, the law had been in the making for 25 years, and its enactment by itself is a great accomplishment of this administration. Thank you, most especially to Kong Joey, for ably quarterbacking this landmark legislation. I personally know how hard that work, but we really have to give it to Kong Joey for having this legislation for the country finally after 25 years. Nakita nyo naman sa mga diskusyon, no? Madaming issues, no, that need to be clarified under the new law. Okay, the discussions, the panel discussion, ably moderated by Uni, whose knowledge of the new law is very apparent, is very telling. No? Therefore, we in Phoenix, we strongly urge our government agencies, especially the BIR, to issue the implementing rules and regulations, or at least guidelines, to help clarify these issues. This is especially true for the reduced corporate income tax rate in the light of the forthcoming tax deadline this April. But as Yuni was trying to say, it would be good if the BIR can consider extension of this deadline if legally feasible to do it. Thank you for our Tax and Legal Committee headed by Dick Dubaladad and Liaison Director Uni and our hardworking staff for putting this well-attended webinar together. I understand there were more than 800, and that number alone shows beyond doubt, no, the interest in this bill. And Kong Joey, don't be surprised if we will hold another webinar. And I was really listening and glad to hear that you're willing to be a speaker when we do decide to have that webinar. I'm sure there are a lot of issues that need your insight, that need your background about on this law to help our public understand this new law. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.
Thank you, Attorney Francis Edwin, Phoenix President. Thank you also to our speakers, panelists, guests, and to all our participants for joining us this afternoon in this Create webinar. And as we end today's event, let us remember to stay at home and take time to pray during this Holy Week, especially for everyone's safety and good health. And may God bless and protect us all with His mercy and grace this Holy Week, so that the Lord may turn our mourning into the joy of Easter this Sunday. So on behalf of the Phoenix Tax and Legal Committee, this is Rina Manuel saying thank you for joining us today, and take care, everyone. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maraming salamat. Kong Joey,
Thank you.
kumusta kayo?
Bye-bye.
Hello?
Thank you,
Wala na?
Kong Joey.
Thank you,
Wala na si Kong
Your
Joey?
Honor. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bakit?
Kumusta kayo? Mukhang
Okay
pagod na
lang,
pagod
sir.
kayo, Joey. Ha? Ano yung Bayanihan 3? Sabi mo, hindi pa, ano? Di ba, isa trabaho rin yan?
Nakailang sampal na ba ako sa DOF? 6?
Bye-bye, Your Honor. Bye.
Naka-6 na po ako.
Ha? Hindi ba papasa yun?
Yung,
Natin yun,
yung maliit, tingin ko ito sa 1 week na Metro Manila, kukunin lang, sila, magpipitsi-pitsi lang sila sa mga tira-tira eh. Hindi, walang bayanihan 3, I think.
Wala.